Greetings, I'm Thomas, and welcome back to the Basilisk Keep. In today's episode, we're going to be going over the lower body armor, so everything from the belt down. I don't have the belt yet. You have to stay tuned for the next episode. But until then, you at least get to see how the armor was put together. So come along with me, and I think we're going to have a good time. Alright, so I got another package from Ed, the Dragon's Playthings. I'm going to open it up. This should be the leg armor, and generally the lower body armor for this costume. As a quick reminder, in our previous package from Ed, we got these hip plates. We'll be working on those this episode as well. Open her up. It is chunky. And I don't know how well this comes across on camera, but this section right here, that's a whole inch thick. I was not expecting that. No wonder Ed said that it took so long and so much plastic. We have a cod piece. Yep, most uncomfortable part of putting together Mandalorian. And if I'm not mistaken, that was above the belt. I'll have to look at that. Thigh plates. I'm not sure what's going on here. You can kind of see it here as well. I don't know what these grooves are intended to be for. Perhaps for mounting solution. Actually, no. Probably what they're for. I don't think it's these connector pieces, but it's probably something like that. Put some webbing through there, hold them on. We'll have to fill that. From what I understand, that's a problem with the model, not with Ed's printing. There is the top of one of the greaves. I don't know why I didn't expect the pieces to be this big, but I didn't. So, sorry for having you print all this, Ed. There's the back of one of the greaves. Let's see if this happens to be the back of the same one I was just looking at. I think so. So that'll go together, something like that. And then this will clip together at the bottom, like that. Awesome. This all looks great. Thank you, Ed. So, if you remember from the last few times I did a bunch of sanding and finish work on parts, primarily the pauldrons and the cuirass. What I did started with roughing up the material. With Sintra, that's pretty easy, not a whole lot to do, although super glue can be a pain. With the 3D prints, however, there's a lot of layer line and banding that needs to be smoothed out. And the goal of roughing up is just to give some tooth, as the industry calls it, basically some micro tears and rough surface for Bondo to stick to. We already tested in the Curious episode that, printer resin just doesn't work for me. Might work for some people, doesn't work for me. Bondo it is. But what we haven't tested is what's the best sanding solution for roughing up. So I have here some 240 grit, I think it's 240, 220 grit sandpaper and some red Scotch-Brite. Scotch-Brite only has like 4 or 5 grits. Large grit, medium grit, fine grit, ultra fine, ultra coarse, stuff like that. And basically, it's just a Brillo pad like you would use for washing dishes, but impregnated with some garnet. Exactly the same as the sandpaper. The advantage is it's spongy and has little hairs that can maybe get into grooves a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is for this first round of roughing up, for these 2 pieces in particular, I don't know which is left and which is right. Doesn't really matter right now, but I'll label them 1 and 2. And I'm going to focus my efforts on the front, at least to start. So don't worry about me losing track of that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to spend 5 minutes on each one. One is going to be with sandpaper. 2 is going to be with Scotch-Brite. Only 5 minutes. And then we'll go to the Bondo step and we'll see to which one the Bondo sticks better, or if it even makes a difference. All right, I'm going to prepare some sandpaper and we'll get to it. All right, I'm just going to stop it there. We already have conclusive results. The Scotch-Brite, whereas it's a good idea, gets into the grooves a bit more, it's just not harsh enough. It's a little too soft. Great for taking the paint off of something that you don't want to change the shape of. Sandpaper might go down through the material that you're painting, not just the paint, but this isn't doing anything other than tearing itself up. You can see here where some of these catchy bits caught the fibers. So there you have it. Sandpaper's the winner. I have a lot of sanding in my future. All right, so I just had a thought. Using the Scotch-Brite didn't work so well for number 2 here. What about just not rough sanding before filling? I'm going to try that. I'm going to do a little bit more sanding on this, the spot where I missed in the 5 minutes. But I'm not going to do any further sanding on this until after I have Bondo on it. And we'll check back at various points, or maybe just at the end. You'll be able to see in a couple minutes here. And we'll see if it's even worth it to do rough sanding before Bondo. Because if it's not, that could save a heck of a lot of time. Let's find out. So one thing to note is obviously, as usual, there's assembly of these pieces. Adjust the camera real quick. So, in order to fit on Ed's printer, the front or shin part of the greaves had to be split in two. He split each one in a different location based on features so that it would come together nicer, which I appreciate. There needs to be a little bit of cleanup in order to glue these together. As you can see, there's some brim here that needs to come off. That surface is way too shiny. There's not going to be enough tooth for the glue to hold this together. So I need to do that. And then, like with the cuirass, we'll put in some canvas and whatchamacallit. Epoxy. Oh my goodness. I'm recording way too late in the day. The knee. The knee also needs to go on. So it goes on there like that. But Maker Baked kindly added some registration pieces. Put that together like that. And it's much stronger. So I'll be doing that as well. You might be able to see I've already done some rough sanding on these. Now on glue joints, I definitely want to rough sand regardless of the results of our Bondo test. Because the roughing up really helps the parts come together when super glued. So I'm going to get to work. Oh, another thing. Due to the sheer size of these pieces, there's some cracking that's happened. On the other leg, I guess there's not similar cracking in the tab, but there are some cracks right there. Now that's something that's going to happen pretty frequently when you're working with 3D prints. Just fix it. As I keep trying to say throughout this build process, when things go wrong, just roll with it. Worst case scenario, you can pass it off as battle damage. I'm going to get to work. We're going to time lapse this, and we should soon have a functioning, if not good looking, greave. Now, Ed has a lot of faith in super glue on 3D prints, especially PLA. I don't necessarily. I don't have a lot of faith in super glue, period. So I will still cover this with epoxy and canvas. I'm just not going to do it on screen because you've already seen that with the Cuirass. And hopefully that glue joint eventually dries. So just because I'm doing a test with not sanding part of it doesn't mean I'm not going to sand any of it. Just going to do some rough sanding to very thoroughly make sure that I get all the lines taken care of. Well, most of them. It'll also leave a nicer surface for the Bondo to cling to. Did you know that you can weld plastic? I mean, I did. That's kind of technically how a lot of 3D printing works. But I've never done it before, and I don't have a 3D printing pen to do it. If we look at this calf piece right here, if you remember from the last segment, it's broken. And I tried fixing it with super glue, and it's broken. So I'm going to use some 3D printer filament to stick it back together. I've also got my soldering iron with a tip that I don't care about. You might notice profuse amounts of smoke pouring off of this anytime I touch the soldering iron to it. That is not the plastic. That is the incredibly noxious fumes of the super glue burning. Half a whiff of this and your sinuses will be burning for like 15 minutes. It is awful stuff. Please always try to avoid burning your super glue. Since I have the plastic and the soldering iron out, I'm also going to touch up the outsides of the main joints on the shins so that they're just a little stronger. And then of course the insides will get epoxy. At the last minute, I decided to make a change of plans. For the most part, most of my armor is 3D printed, using other people's files. But I figured in a full video of 3D prints, why not show an example of what you can do by hand? I have some leftover Sintra from the Pauldron episode, and also from the glove armor. And I figured, why don't I freehand a thigh plate? So this is going to be the left thigh, and it's going to be 2 layers of Sintra. That's why you see 2 squares hovering around there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out the top plate, use that as a stencil or a guide, and trace onto my second piece for my inner plate. And then I will trim off everything that's supposed to be left on the top, which is the smaller inner piece. There's a whole bunch of trimming work to do whenever you're working with a material such as Sintra or maybe even leather. just lots of refinement that you can do, and you could spend a long time doing this. I'm going to be using a leather tool that I think you've seen before, last episode or 2 episodes ago maybe, which is a stitching groover. And what I'm doing here is I'm just adding some surface detail to my parts to make them look more interesting. Once I'm done with all this edge work, I'll be gluing the pieces together, but in order to get them to fit together, I will be using the heat gun to form them slightly, make them curve to my leg a little bit, and then I'll be gluing them together. So you may remember from the unboxing part of the video that I did not get strap loops for the thigh plate. Or rather, you may not remember seeing them because I'm just going to be honest here, Ed forgot. There was a large batch of prints, and these look like unimportant pieces, in all honesty. So I'm just going to make do, and I've got some Kydex left from a personal project. It's a thermoplastic. I'm just going to bend these into shape and then glue them in with some epoxy. And I did do the same thing, slightly different variation with the left thigh. So now it's time to do the body filling. There's lots of these little grooves and ridges that are left behind as artifacts of the 3D printing process. You've seen this before, not going to stay long on it. It's just Bondo spot filling putty thinned out with acetone so that it runs nicer and gets into all the little grooves and crevices. Sanding! Yay! Do you honestly need me to tell you what's going on here? No? Okay, well, I'll just say something anyway. I have been in this part of the project, in the lower body armor, paying special attention to make sure that I am not pressing too hard with the sandpaper. I am doing a light, gentle touch, just letting the sandpaper do all the work. And so far, it's working out well. We now interrupt your sanded parts montage to bring you this important message. So these are the 2 parts where I sanded one and did absolutely nothing to the other before Bondo. And in all honesty, they are very similar. The unsanded one is a bit rougher around the edges because, honestly, sandpaper gets the edges the best. But on the front faces, these are pretty stinking similar. Well, yeah. So I was just getting through the final round of Bondo. You can tell by just how little Bondo there is. And I dropped this on my kitchen floor on the way to do the final round of sanding. So, when life gives you lemons, make lemonade, right? So I'm just going to glue this piece back on, and it'll be obvious that it was broken. So, what do we do when there's a bad situation in costuming? We make the best of it. I'm going to make it look intentional. Ever since the first season of Ahsoka came out, there's been a theme in costume and Star Wars costuming of doing kintsugi, which, for those who don't know, kintsugi is the Japanese art of repairing pottery with gold. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue this up like you just saw, and then I'm going to embellish it. I'm going to make it look like the crack was much more extensive, much worse than it actually was. And then I'm going to use my Dremel. I'm going to use a large bit for the gouge and then a smaller bit to refine it. And I'm just going to make it look like this was the plan all along. So, as usual, I'm out in my garage for putting on the primer. And this is just going to make sure that all the last little scratches and tiny imperfections are filled in before doing the wet sanding. Now I come to the penultimate step in the process. We're going to do some wet sanding. I just did some spraying, put a nice layer of filler primer on the parts, and they're still a little bit rough, mostly because of the texture of the paint, but also because the Bondo just doesn't get everything. Just going to make it nice and smooth, and then it'll be ready for the Beskar. Beskar time. You know the drill. We've got my parts, I've got my rag, I've got my graphite powder. So all we're going to do is just buff the paint so it's shiny while it's still a little bit tacky. Rub in some graphite powder, buff that in, and make it look real nice and shiny. What do you think about that? A whole episode and hardly any major screw-ups. There was one kind of screw-up with the left thigh plate. Chipped. But I was able to embellish on that, and I think it'll make the final product even better. So, that said, let's show you what's going on here. Obviously, everything is lower body. It's below the belt, so it's not really going to show up in this camera view. So a lot of this post-mortem discussion is going to be covering B-roll. But before that, real quick, I want to show you a couple things. So first, there is a little bit of armor that you would be able to see if I was wearing the belt. The belt is next episode, so you'll have to come back. But you would be able to see in this camera view some of the hip and oblique armor. Hip pad, oblique armor. And that would sit probably about here-ish. You'd be able to see the top of it. And basically, this groove right here, so from here down to here, that will be attached to the belt, and it's split so that there'd be a little bit of range of motion. I don't know for sure if I will wear these at the convention in June, simply because it's even more armor, harder to sit down in, but we'll see. The next piece is the cod piece. Obviously, you wouldn't be able to see it, it's below the belt. I'm not even sure if I will wear this at all. I wanted to have it just in case it was something that I wanted to wear. However, if you look at most live action Mandalorians, most of them aren't really wearing them. And the ones who are don't do a whole lot in the show because it's limiting of movement. And finally, here we have the tail plate. Now, when I was unboxing, you may remember I erroneously thought that it had something to do with the cod piece. No. This is the butt plate. This will go on the back of the belt, somewhere around here, and just protect your lower spine. This will probably cause more problems for sitting down than any other piece of armor on this entire build. So I don't know that we'll be using this, but we have it for pictures. It's important. So now we'll get into some B-roll footage of the rest of the lower body armor. And while we're looking at that, let's talk about some lessons learned. So, probably the biggest, most important lesson learned on this project is let the sandpaper do the work. Back when I was making the cuirass, I was really pushing hard into what I was sanding, really trying to grind out the bumps and ridges, when really all I was doing was giving myself more work and making my fingers hurt more. Yeah, turns out Bondo is significantly softer than 3D printed plastic. This is intentional. Technically, Bondo being softer than metal is what's intentional, but as far as our purposes are concerned, being softer than the 3D printed plastic is intentional. You want the Bondo to be the first thing to go. For that reason, it's common to do a really heavy sanding pass before adding filler, and then very, very light sanding from there on out. Like barely touch the product with your sandpaper and let the sandpaper do the work. Just go until it's smooth. It's less time, it's less effort, and it's less Bondo. fewer passes. It's a win-win-win if you do things correctly, turns out. The other interesting thing was, I really sanded on the plastic like you're supposed to before adding Bondo, except for that one oblique piece. And yet the two oblique pieces turned out basically the same. I don't know that pre-sanding is necessary. I'll probably still do it in the future just because it's a habit, and I'm a little bit afraid that the one time I don't pre-sand, everything's going to go wrong. But I might try not pre-sanding in the future. Definitely going to pre-sand the helmet when that comes down, because I know that's being printed on a coarser printer. But for everything else, do I really need to pre-sand? I don't know. So, lessons learned, all that said, tell me what you think. How did this turn out? I think it turned out great, but you might think otherwise. You might think it's a pile of poop. I want to know. So tell me down in the comments, and leave a like, subscribe if you're not already, and we'll see you next time. So, good luck, don't die, we're all counting on you.